Welcome to She Moves Bravely, a podcast dedicated to empowering women through stories of resilience, courage, and success. I'm your host, Shantae Dent. Today, I have the honor of introducing you to a woman who moves bravely. Her name is Karaleigh Garrison. Karaleigh, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you here to share with the audience some of what you've overcome, how you overcame it, and what you're doing today. Share with us your story, what you've overcome. You're an incredible woman, a mom, a wife, and would love for you just to share on our platform your powerful and incredible story.
Yeah. So, like most of us, I have a lot of stories. None of us is just made up of one individual story, right? We have these incredible lives that are made up of so many different powerful moments. But I do have a favorite one that really changed my life so much. And it started, well, it didn't really start, but the story begins back in 2018 when my family was living in San Antonio, Texas. And I actually had spent my entire life wanting to sing. I'm a very ambitious, outgoing kind of person. And I dreamed of like being on stages and becoming this famous singer and speaking on stages and talking to people and doing these big, huge things with my life. But in 2008, I got married to my husband when I was in college, and we went on to have 3 kids, and my husband became disabled within 5 years of us getting married. And in 2018, that was kind of the pinnacle of his disability. And by that point in time, 2 of our 3 kids had their autism diagnoses, and our youngest was only about 2 or 3. So he didn't have his diagnosis yet, but it would come in the next few years. And at the time, our kids, let's see, they were 7 and 6 and 2, I think. And so our older 2 were in therapy for 4 hours a day after school doing ABA therapy. And my husband was completely disabled, and I was his caretaker as well as the kids. And he had a whole slew of different diagnoses. He was severely struggling with severe debilitating PTSD, anxiety, depression, but he also had something called familial episodic ataxia. And so he was actually collapsing multiple times a week, and I would have to carry him to bed. And so we reached this point in 2018 where he was finally approved for SSI. And we went from having 0 income because I couldn't work because I was caring for him and the kids, and he couldn't work because he kept collapsing. And we finally got approved for SSI, and he was going to all of his doctor appointments, and the kids had all their doctor appointments, and everything was kind of like really tentatively kind of stable. And we were very, very religious, and we got this very strong, just like intuitive hit that we needed to move back to Utah to finish our degrees at BYU. And in Texas, we lived down the block from my in-laws, who were very involved in helping us care for the kids because my husband was in and out of the hospital all the time. And so we're going, really, God, you want us to move away from all this support? Like, come on. Come on. No, thanks. We're good. Thanks, God. But when God puts something on your heart, he doesn't usually let it go.
Can't ignore it. No.
And it kept coming back and back and back. And finally, we reached this point where I was like, all right, I get it. That's what we're supposed to do. And I was praying, and I was going, okay, if we do this, are we going to be okay? And I got this really crystal clear answer, which was the first time in my life I'd actually like gotten words in response to a prayer and not just like a feeling, right?
Feeling.
And it was, it's not just going to be okay. It's going to be amazing.
Oh, yes. Incredible.
And then what followed was the hardest year of our lives. which made the pandemic look like nothing in comparison. Like I was like, wait, we just have to sit home? That's what's so awful about the pandemic. Oh, I can handle that.
Yeah.
So we took this huge leap of faith and we moved several states away from all of our support systems, away from the therapies, away from everything. And we became full-time college students. My husband couldn't even walk across campus because he was walking on a cane. He was only like 32 or 33 years old at the time, walking on a cane because he'd collapse and his leg would drop out under him. And we had massive trial after massive trial, and like this awful things kept happening, especially with our housing and one thing after the other. But the biggest thing that happened came just about 2 months after we moved. We moved in August, and then October came, and my husband and I were both full-time college students, and we had 3 kids at 3 different schools. We had our oldest, Aurora, she must have been in 3rd grade. I think she was 8. Our youngest, Benjamin, was in preschool, and then Joshua was 7, and he was severely autistic and completely and utterly nonverbal, and they would not take him at the same school that Aurora went to. So he was at a special school just for kids with autism. And we lost all of our therapies because we moved. So now we were put on these year-long wait lists. And Joshua was completely, and I mean completely nonverbal. He didn't have a single sound that meant anything. And I had this moment, I call it my Facebook meltdown moment, where I like went on Facebook Live and just like cried to people. Not my most beautiful moment, but I went on and I just gave up. I like publicly gave up that my son would ever talk. And I said, I can't do it anymore. I can't keep hoping and praying that my son will ever say mom or ever say, I love you, because we're 7 years into this. We've been doing 4 hours of therapy a day, and now we just lost it all. And he's made 0 improvement. I can't keep this up. I've got my 3-year-old praying with us every single night that his brother will have a voice. And clearly, this is not in God's plan, or it would have happened already. And so I surrender. I surrender to God's plan. And that, looking back on it, is such actually a beautiful moment.
Yeah, I see it.
Because we turn it over to God. And when we turn our lives over to Him, beautiful things really do happen, even though in that moment I wasn't really feeling the beauty of it. But it actually was really beautiful. And it was only about a week later that our lives were completely turned upside down. And it was the first Saturday of October. And it's one of those scenes that's like seared into my mind that I'll just never, ever forget. Because Joshua walked out of his room that morning and he looked like a completely different kid. He looked like he had lost a whole bunch of weight overnight. Like you could see his ribs and you could see this thigh gap. And I was absolutely horrified. I was so horrified that I took a picture of him and I sent it to his teacher at school. And I was like, did he look like this yesterday? Or have I just been so absent-minded because of moving and because of being in college all of a sudden? Have I just not noticed that he looked like this? Like, how could I have missed this? And she's going, no, he did not look like that yesterday. And I had this kind of split mind where half of my mind was just freaking out, like, he's dying, something's horribly wrong, like mama bear, like, oh my goodness, what's happening? And then the other half of my brain was like, he's fine, he's just sick, everything's okay, you can be calm. And so Joshua walked out of the living room and curled up into a ball for the rest of the weekend and laid on the floor. And now you have to understand a little bit about who Joshua is and what his normal personality is like, because for him to walk out of that bedroom and not bounce off the walls
You knew it. Yeah.
was a huge deal. This is my kid who I had a lock on the front door because he would run out that front door. He had actually opened our neighbor's car while they were backing out of their driveway because he was so into opening vans. I mean, we would pull into a parking lot, and before I could unbuckle my seat, he would be out of his seatbelt and out the front passenger door because the side doors were child locked. And he was so fast, he'd be halfway across the parking lot. And I'd be racing out after him like a banshee, screaming, trying to keep my kid safe because he'd be running through the parking lot. We had years and years and years of that. Like, it took every ounce of the most hypervigilant, mom I could be to try to keep that kid safe. He was never not running, never not moving, never not being a danger to himself. So for him to walk out of that room, part of my brain was sitting there going, ooh, maybe I get to relax today. Maybe I get a little bit of a break today. And then part of me was like, I hope he, bounces back from this soon, right?
Yeah.
So by Monday morning, he was still really, really sick. And I was like, yeah, that's it. We're going to the doctor. And so I took him to the pediatrician, and he was so weak that I had to carry him into the office because he couldn't walk in there on his own. And she barely looked at him. He laid on the floor of her office without hardly moving. And she stepped over him and she was like, it's just a stomach bug. He'll be back to himself in a few days. And I was like, I don't think so. We're already a few days into this, and I know my kids.
Mama
I've got
knew.
3 kids, right? I was like, I'm not new to this. Like, I've been around the block a few times. I know how my kids are when they are sick, and this is not anything like I've ever seen before. And she's going, no, he's fine. He'll be back to himself. Just give it a few more days. And she was like, I mean, I guess, we could do blood work, but he's got autism, and it's really hard to get blood from a kid with autism. So we're going to do nothing. So she sent us home with nothing. And remember, my husband and I are still full-time college students, trading off who's missing all their classes to stay home with the sick kid. And so a couple days later, I was sitting in my class, and my husband was home with our son, and he texted me a picture of Joshua. And I took one look at that picture, and Joshua looked drastically worse. His eyes were kind of sunken in, and his skin was turning gray. And I was like, nope, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done watching my kid dying in front of my eyes. And I left in the middle of my class, and I took him to the ER, and I had to carry him into the ER. And they took one look at him, and they were like, we need to get blood from this kid right now. And I tell you what, this kid who I had to carry into the ER because he was so weak he couldn't walk on his own, it took a full team of 5 grown men and me holding him down because he fought like a saber-toothed tiger to get one little drop of blood from his finger. But all it took was that one little drop of blood. And he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and he was in diabetic ketoacidosis, and he was definitely dying. And so they sent us off to a different hospital, and he was admitted to Primary Children's Hospital in Utah, which is one of the biggest hospitals here. And we get to the hospital, and I'm like, you guys don't understand who this kid is. You're going to give him that medicine, and he's going to come back to life, and he's going to burn this hospital to the ground. He's going to change the language on all your computers to Japanese. He's going to tear this place to shreds. Like, this is my worst nightmare, that this kid is in the hospital. Like, you don't understand. I was a wreck. But they were incredible. And they actually had a nurse just sit at the door of our room all night, just in case Josh woke up, so that I could get a little bit of sleep. And don't get me wrong, they had to like prick his finger or his toe or something to get a drop of blood like every hour. And they didn't send up a whole team to help with it. It was just me and the nurse, and he would just tear out chunks of my hair each time. And it was a fun night. And then the next morning, they sent me to parent training, where I got to learn all about how I would have to watch every single bite of food that my severely autistic son would eat for the rest of his entire life, and how I would have to calculate how many carbs were in that and dose him with needles and insulin for the rest of his life to keep him alive. And I had this moment, my moment with God, where I was like, are you kidding me? I don't really consider this anything close to okay, let alone amazing. Like, I'm not sure where you're fitting this into your idea of like okay or amazing, but like this doesn't count for me. And I definitely was completely overwhelmed and sleepless and not totally thinking clearly. But my point is that I go back to that moment all the time. Because in our lives, we get really stuck where we see with blinders on, and we can only see the terrible thing that's happening right in front of us right now. And we really struggle to even imagine that there might be something beyond it. But now that I know the rest of Joshua's story, now that I know it, all the things that happen in my life now I know that there's another chapter.
Absolutely.
Now I know that God can turn really, really awful things into miraculous things.
That's his specialty.
It really is. And so we went home from the hospital. He was hospitalized Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And he went back to school on Monday, and he pooped in the potty for the first time in his life. And we'd been trying to potty train him. I mean, he was 7. We'd been trying to potty train him forever, but he wasn't eating enough to be regular. And he just went to school and pooped in the potty. And it was like, how? It's because he was finally eating. He'd been chronically underweight for so long. We'd even tried him on prescription medications to get him to eat, and we couldn't get him to eat. But as soon as he started getting that insulin in his system, he was like eating. Now, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like, yay, now let's eat vegetables and healthy food all of a sudden. No, he was still severely autistic, and all he would eat was corn dogs. So he was eating like 9 corn dogs a day, smothered in ketchup, and that was the only thing he would eat. So we were like stocking up on big Costco-sized boxes. But it was really amazing to finally get him eating, and he finally started gaining the weight that he'd been needing to gain for years and years. And what was really, really amazing was that within a month, he could say all of his colors.
Look at that.
And from that moment on, his speech skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And then within a year, I was begging him to shut up because he just kept talking all the time, and he would just be in my face and he wouldn't stop. And I was getting so overwhelmed. And even to this day, I have to constantly remind myself what a gift it is that he can now talk.
Yes.
And he says things, and I have to remember that I prayed for that. I prayed for that voice.
Yeah.
Prayed for it so hard. And it's amazing because I have this thing that I love to say that there's blessings in every trial, and there's trials in every blessing. And, you know, the next part of this story is that actually I had been dreaming of singing forever. And while I was taking care of everyone for so long, I didn't get to sing. I didn't get to do all the things that I wanted to do. But when we were moving back to Utah and we were going to go back to BYU, I was like, this is my chance. I'm going to get to sing. I'm going to get to audition for the School of Music again, and it's going to be a thing. And so he was diagnosed in October, and in December was my audition. And I was like, this is my opportunity. So I auditioned in December, and then I got through the first round. And then in January was the second one. And I found out in February that I did not get in. And I was so devastated that I thought the world was over. I thought I would never sing again. And you should know that like they only let like 3 or 4 people into this program, to the opera program at BYU. And I was so devastated that they actually reached out to me and they were like, don't give up. Please
Don't
keep
give up.
going, please. And I was so devastated that I didn't even respond. I was like, this is another example of like, it was the end of the world and all I could see was that tunnel vision. And I was like, no, the end of the world. I'll never sing again. But because I was watching Joshua blossom and begin to talk, I started having these realizations and I started to see how it was changing everything. And I started to see like, oh my gosh, maybe if Joshua can have a voice in a different way than I ever thought possible, maybe I can too.
Love
Maybe
that
God
connection.
has a different plan for me too. Maybe if I don't give up on this, then miracles can still be around the corner. And so I pivoted and I started writing my own music and I started seeing what other avenues there were. And I started having these realizations of like, wait a minute, I actually don't even like opera that much. I've been studying opera for 20 years, and I thought that this was the thing I wanted to do with my whole life. And I've been like hanging on to this dream for dear life. And then I was like, but if I got this dream, I would be away from my kids all
Mhm.
the time. And hold up, that's not the life I
Not
want.
right.
And if I was the star of the opera show, somebody else would be telling me what to do all the time. Someone else would choose the words I sang. Someone else would choose the costumes I wore. Someone else would choose every part of what I did. Hold up. That doesn't sound like my dream come true. Wait, why was I dreaming about this my whole life? And I started to see what a gift it was that I didn't get the thing I dreamed of forever. I started to see the gift in type 1 diabetes. And I started to see the gift in not getting into the School of Music. And as I pivoted and started writing my own music, I started writing my album, which is called Seeking Sunshine, which is about finding that gift
Yeah.
in the darkness. And I started my podcast, which is the thing by the same name. And that whole idea of just there's blessings in
Yeah.
every trial. And there's trials in every blessing. It just depends on your perspective. But there's always another chapter, even when we can't see it yet. There's always a miracle on the other side. If you just can hold out for it,
Mm.
it changed everything for me.
I love how your son's journey inspired you. It also led you to changing your perspective about your situation.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Now, when you share your story, I don't believe I'm alone in painting this picture of a superwoman. Yet, I know there were nights that you didn't feel super at all. How did you handle those low moments, those low seasons where you look to the left and it's your husband, and you look in front of you and it's one child, and you look to the right and it's another child, and you look behind you and it's your other child? How did you press through those moments, Karaleigh?
You know, a lot of people think that it's like, oh, don't give up, never give up. And I give up a lot. There were many, many times on my journey where I was like, I give up. I can't do this. It's not about not giving up. It's not about not having those dark moments. It's about getting back up again after you have them. It's about waking up the next morning after you cried yourself to sleep and going, well, someone has to do it. Someone's got to feed them. Someone has to stand back up and be the hands for God in this situation. Like God's going to work through me, but he's got to have some hands here,
Yeah.
right? It's not that it's not that I didn't give up. It's not that it wasn't, that I didn't crumble. It's that we get back up again
Get back up.
eventually. Yeah.
Yes. And I like that you even added that last word, eventually. When we think about moving bravely, I believe sometimes we'll assume that from day one, it's ready, set, go. And the reality is, it's not that simple. We hear the stories like Karaleigh and other guests, we hear their stories after the fact, but we also have to remember the details, those moments, those seasons, the dark, dark nights and the dark, dark days when the sun was shining, but it felt dark. And it's important, I believe, that we reiterate because oftentimes I believe some of us will stay stuck because we feel as if we're not Superwoman. Oh, I'm not equipped like Karaleigh. I mean, she's amazing. Look at her countenance. It all came together. But here's the truth. Karaleigh wasn't feeling like it was all together in the moment when she was in the trenches and in being that anchor for her family. But speaking of anchor, we must have an anchor. Your anchor was in your faith. Your anchor was in God. And I love that because sometimes when we say she moves bravely, we hear that she moved bravely. It's a mindset of I have to do this. I have to become. I, I, I. When I would hope that our audience will hear the essence of Karaleigh's story, her journey, that she was not alone. She was in a season of her life where, yeah, she may have felt a little hopeless, yet she was anchored even when she did not understand um, the next step. Now, speaking of next step, I want to circle back when you talked about this move. I love it. You were just saying how it didn't make sense. Why are we moving from our comfort zone, from Texas to Utah, where our family and our support and the therapy? What I love the most is you, as well as your family, your husband, you chose to believe what you could not fully see, and you took that one step. You didn't know what it was going to lead to, but you took that step. Karaleigh, how can you encourage a woman who is in that space of the unknown, desperate, but I'm in this space of the unknown? What do I do? What do I do next?
We always assume that the unknown is going to be the same or worse than we're currently living or that we've previously known. And I challenge you to start assuming that the unknown is going to be so much better, so much more magical than anything that you've ever experienced, that you've ever faced, because it is. You've got to start trusting and knowing that the future, it's gonna be so incredible. It's just waiting for you to know, just waiting for you to know how magical it's gonna be. We had been in Texas for like 4 years, and the entire time we were there, my husband's disability was really bad. Like we had it had started before that. We lived in California, and my husband's disability had been like there wasn't like an event that led to his disability. It was a genetic thing. So it just kind of like got worse and worse and worse. And we got to Texas and it was like the worst it had ever been. And it took that whole time period for him to like really get diagnosed. And then we moved, and it was the best thing we ever could have done for his health. Like, some of the times that we were in the hospital with him was because of really severe asthma, which is not even one of the things I mentioned when I was talking about all of these things. His asthma has completely, entirely gone away. He no longer walks on a cane. He jogs for fun sometimes. His health has tremendously improved since moving here. Like, we could not possibly have imagined how moving states, like literally, I think a significant part of it was the weather from state to state, like the humidity of Texas versus the dryness of Utah, like physically helped him to like things that we never could have comprehended. But that's the point. It's like when you feel it, you got to trust that feeling. You've got to trust that intuition.
Because moving bravely doesn't always mean you're 100% confident that
Usually
all of the
doesn't.
pieces are going to fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
I love what you said, Karaleigh. We often assume that the unknown is worse, horrible, scary, all the horrible negative things. But what if we changed our perspective? Just what if we assume this unknown space, this one step, this move, trusting intuition, just what if it's better? What if it changes the trajectory of my life, of my relationship? What if it positions me to this place, a physical place, a mental or emotional place that I've always desired? What if? Can we consider what if and consider those best case scenarios versus the worst case scenario? I love that you mentioned that shift and adjustment in our mindset and in our perspective. Would love for you to share what you're doing today. You alluded to singing and your podcast. Tell us more.
Yeah. So, we went to college and we graduated, and it was like, yes, we did the thing that we moved here to do. And then it was like, okay, what do I want to do now? I didn't get into the School of Music, which was the thing I had dreamed of forever. And instead, I studied sewing and costume design, and I got to be backstage while not doing I wasn't at the front of the stage, which was where I wanted to be. I was backstage. But I will tell you that I adored that major. I adored studying costume design, and it brought me this confidence in my abilities that I hadn't been able to cultivate over the previous decade. And I was a college student for like 12 years because I had started college in 2008 and I graduated in 2021. And maybe that's 13 years. I can't remember. The math eludes me. So I graduated and I was like, what do I want to do? Now I finally get to do what I want to do. And it was like, well, I've always wanted to sing. And so I started on this path of what am I missing to release my album? I want to write an album and release an album. And so I started learning. I'd studied music, I studied voice forever. And I knew I could write melodies, but I didn't know how to write the background tracks. And so I started learning how to compose and how to um, release music, how to be, how to do all the things I needed to do to release my album. And as that process started coming about, um, it was, I came, it came along my path, this notion of podcasting. And it ended up combining everything for me because I had done public speaking classes and I had done the music classes. And here was this way that I could use all of me and be home with my kids. And I could do public speaking, but not every night and being gone from my kids every night. I could do it from my home, from while my kids were at school, and use my voice to help people. And I could share my story from home and help people, and I could listen to other people's stories. and I wrote my podcast intro song called Seeking Sunshine. And then I wrote my album, and then I started writing custom podcast intro songs for other podcasters. And it was like, this is where I belong all along, in this way that I never could have predicted, where I get to use everything I have. I get to be all of me in the most amazing way. And I still get to be mom. I still get to be home with my kids. I still get to raise my kids because I always wanted to do that. I never wanted to like have my kids and then just not be there. No, I want to be with my kids, but I also want to be all of me because I have gifts and talents to share. Right? And it was this realization of I get to do both. I get to do both.
Love
And
it.
so they're at school right now, and I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
And I get to
Mhm.
finish this conversation and finish writing another custom song for somebody. And it's amazing. And so now I am writing custom podcast intro songs for people, and I'm teaching podcasting because moms and women, like, we need our voices to be heard. We need
Yes.
all of these stories to be shared.
Yes. Yes.
And it's like, I felt so kind of trapped in motherhood before I found podcasting. Like, I didn't feel like anybody understood what my life was like or, how hard it was. And then when I started my podcast and I started interviewing all these incredible people, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone.
Not alone. Not
Not
at
alone. There's
all.
so many amazing. You could tell. Can you tell by my energy that podcasting's my favorite thing to do?
Love it.
There's so
Yes.
many amazing women and so many amazing stories that need to be shared. And so I love having people like you. I'm excited to have you on my show. And then I also get to teach women, especially moms, where
Mhm.
it's like there's a lot of things that, being a mom and being home with your kids all the time makes you feel like it's hard to get out sometimes. But podcasting, oh, it just opens up this entire world that you didn't realize was possible before.
This is incredible. I am so not just impressed with your journey, inspired in a unique way, because as you mentioned, we all have our journey. Women, we experience life, various roles, and sometimes we feel no one understands. I'm alone. And when we hear another woman's story, when we hear another woman's journey, even if our stories are not identical, there's a sense of hope and empowerment that we can extract. And that's what I'm experiencing listening to your story, Karaleigh. And I'm so thankful for your transparency, your enthusiasm. You have such an incredible glow about yourself. And when you all visit Karaleigh's website and follow her and connect with her, you will get a taste of what I am experiencing. And so, on that note, how can people get in touch with you, Karaleigh?
Yeah, my website is karaleighgarrison.com. You can also go find me on Instagram, which is at karaleigh.garrison, or on Facebook, Karaleigh Garrison. And then I have my podcasts, which are Seeking Sunshine, and then my album is also called Seeking Sunshine. And then if you want to learn about podcasting, I have a podcast where I teach podcasting made easy, and it's called Podcast Like a Mother.
I love it. Well, there you have it, ladies. Karaleigh Garrison sharing with us how she moved bravely, literally moved bravely from California to Texas, from Texas to Utah. In that order? Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay.
hmm
Well, and you are continuously moving bravely, and we admire you. And I encourage everyone to touch bases with Karaleigh. She's sharing intricate details of her life, her story. And for you moms out there, I know she has something for you. So connect with Karaleigh. Karaleigh, thank you for being with us today to continue to move bravely.